everybody, the Book Dad here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'd like to delve a little bit into the world of classic literature. One of the things that I wanted to do by starting this booktube channel is have a place where I could talk and review some of the classic books that I have been reading that I never got a chance to read before in my life. Now, I know here in the American public school system, when we're growing up and going through middle and high school, there's an opportunity that we have in our English classes to read a lot of classic books, whether it be Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet in middle school, or things like The Scarlet Letter in high school. All of these books that are assigned to us maybe don't always get through to us in a way that our teachers hoped that they would. You know, I remember when I was in high school and I could either sit down and read a classic book, or I could go and see Independence Day for the third time. And I think we all know what the Book Dad did back then. So one of the things that I have come around to in recent years is a desire to go back and read some of those books that I missed out on in school, and that perhaps now, as an adult, as a dad and a husband, and had a lot of different experiences in my life, maybe have the opportunity to understand them and appreciate them a little bit more, as well as broaden my own horizons by reading classic works of art from these authors. So one of the things that I have decided to do every year is to include at least a couple of classic books in my reading schedule. So one of the things that I decided to do during that, as I was, of course, my love at the time was thrillers, the CIA spy novels by Vince Flynn and Tom Clancy, all of those books that I've talked about in my previous video, the books that made me who I am. But at that time, Bookwife wanted me to read one of her favorite books. And this, of course, is one of the most famous books of all history and all time, which is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to read that. You know, it's quite a step down in action and excitement from what I am used to reading, right, in those days. But I decided, no, I do want to start reading more classic books, and you can't get more classic than Pride and Prejudice. So I read it and was shocked. I was shocked how good it was. And also what surprised me is how sarcastic Jane Austen was. That I really appreciated as a sarcastic guy myself. So I really liked it. And from that point on, I decided to do this thing where I read a couple of classic books each year. And since then, I've read things like The Count of Monte Cristo, Moby Dick, Wuthering Heights, and some more modern things like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And recently as last year, I realized that some of the great American authors that have written the great American novels, they were woefully absent from my reading schedule, because as of last year, I had never read anything by Ernest Hemingway or John Steinbeck. And so I read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway and East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And both of those, 5-star reads. Absolutely amazing. They were great. And so this is one of the things that, for any of you out there that maybe have not read very much classic literature, or are like me, maybe have read a little bit, but really aren't as well read as you would hope to be, there is definitely a great opportunity out there and authors that will just blow you out of the water if you try them. And so that's my, plug for today, is for everybody to try a little bit more classic literature. Slide in a little book here and there into your fantasy and sci-fi schedule, and it'll really pay some great dividends. So one of the books that I've recently finished, as of about I think I finished it 3 weeks ago maybe, was Of Mice and Men, a very short book. This is really only a novella. I think the version that I read was maybe 100 pages. So it probably depends on the version that you're reading, but it's very short, but excellent. And so what I'd like to do today is give a full dedicated review to Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. So this story takes place in the Salinas Valley of California. And many of his novels take place in this Monterey, California, Salinas, California area. And it just so happens that I know this area quite well because I spent about a year and a half there in Monterey while I was in the Army stationed at the Defense Language Institute. So it was a great opportunity because there is no way I could afford to live there on my own dime. So the government was paying for it. I was able to live there and do the training that I had to do there for a year and a half. But during that year, I was able to travel around, just not just Monterey, but Salinas and all across the coast of California in that area. And it is absolutely beautiful. The ocean, the Monterey Bay area with the cliffs and the beaches and mountains just beyond. It's absolutely stunning. Lush green everywhere. And so it doesn't surprise me that John Steinbeck chooses that as his area for most of his locations. I assume, I haven't looked it up, but I assume he probably grew up there or spent probably most of his life there. And so that's what he's always writing about. So Of Mice and Men is no different. It takes place in that area. And it was written in 1937 and is telling a story of two young men during the last part of the Great Depression. And I think that's some background that's important to this story. The aspect of what America was going through at this time, and specifically California during the Great Depression, where money was scarce, jobs were scarce. It was almost impossible to own your own home, your own farm, anything that would allow you to succeed in the traditional American way. And so this is a story about two young men that are going through that problem. And what is going on in that area at the time is there were a lot of young men that were traveling around basically from farm to farm, trying to get work where they could, scrounge together some money to be able to make it in life and to be able to eventually get married, start their families, and be able to find land to buy and maybe start their own farm or their own business. And it was, of course, extremely difficult during the Great Depression for this to happen. So you have these basically migrant workers that are traveling from one area to the next, trying to find somebody that will give them a day's wage. They're day laborers, and some of these farms would have these barracks set up where their workers would sleep and live. And it's pretty much like an army barracks, right? You just have this long building filled with beds and maybe a dresser or maybe a foot locker to each one. Maybe they put up a shelf on their part of the wall. Very humble circumstances. They don't have a lot of personal belongings to them. They're just there to work, to get their day's wage, and to get 3 square meals. And this is how they're living their lives, trying to survive, trying to move forward and accomplish something. So our story starts with two men, George and Lenny, that are on their way from one farm to their next job that they're looking for. At the beginning of the novel, it doesn't explain fully why they're on the move or what happened at the previous farm, but it becomes apparent as the story progresses. Now, I didn't say this at the first, pardon me, but I am going to make sure that the first portion of this review is a spoiler-free review of Mice and Men, because I realize it was written in 1937, so it's getting close to being a 100-year-old story, which is amazing. But even though it's old and it has probably been spoiled for many of you, if it hasn't, this is an amazing story to read unspoiled, and I would never dream of spoiling it for you if you wanted to have that experience. For me, when I read it a couple weeks ago, I really only had sort of the general idea of what was happening. I didn't have it specifically spoiled to me, but because this is such a famous story that has been around in pop culture, both movie, TVs, even cartoons. There's a lot of cartoons which, when you think about it, is a little messed up. But there's cartoons that talk about this. And so I had a general idea of what was happening and kind of what the characters were like. But the finale I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And that was key to my enjoyment of this story. So, first off, in this review, I will make sure that it's spoiler free. And at the end, I will include a little spoiler portion so that we can talk about the crazy and amazing things that happen without ruining it for anybody that wants to go ahead and cut short and then go read it themselves. So George and Lenny are on their way from one farm to the next. And as they're walking through through the countryside of California, they're talking about their hopes and their dreams, the things that they would like to accomplish in life. And as they're talking, you begin to understand that there is a big difference between these two men. George is definitely the leader of the group, and he is the one that has the ideas, and he's the one that is making the plans and directing them where to go. Lenny is following him, and it becomes apparent very quickly that Lenny is mentally challenged. Although he is a big, hulking guy, his mind has not really progressed beyond the level of a child. And so George is constantly getting angry and frustrated and putting him down and talking about how, can't you remember anything? What is going on? What, like, I have to explain everything a million times for you to get it through your thick skull, and is really not that nice to him. But you can see that he does care for him. He's almost has a big brother role to Lenny, where maybe he gets frustrated, but he still has some love for him, and he still wants him to, to accompany him on this journey. And their dreams are shared, because what George wants is to be able to find enough work where he can scrounge together enough money to buy this plot of land that he knows about, that has a little small house and a few acres around it, where he'd be able to plant his own crops, raise his own animals, and basically have the success that he desires in fulfilling his version of the American dream. And Lenny is there with him along the way. Lenny loves him. Lenny looks up to him like any younger brother does to their older brother. And Lenny realizes that maybe he does forget things and he feels a little bit bad about it, but he doesn't have the full mental capacity to be able to fully understand everything that's going on. But like I said, he is big and he can work hard and he can do more physical manual labor than most people are able to do. So that makes him extremely valuable in this scenario, because between the two of them, they can get two wages and put that money together and be able to afford this dream that they have of getting their own land and their own crops and their own animals and living happily ever after, as it were. So they're talking about this on their way on the road, and they eventually get to the farm where they're going and are able to be hired on there, and then they become workers for this farmer, and they live in this bunkhouse with a bunch of other farmhands, other migrant workers that are there to make their money and probably have more or less the same dreams as George and Lenny do. And so they're all there together, and Steinbeck begins to weave this story of introducing different characters, their different motivations, what's going on with them. And it becomes very interesting how these people interact with each other and the conflicts that arise between them. And George, he's the leader of their twosome, and he's trying to get Lenny to come along with him, but he doesn't want Lenny to speak up, right? Because as soon as Lenny speaks up, then everybody around can immediately see, oh, there's something wrong with him. What is wrong with him? Can he do this? Can he understand anything? No, thanks. We don't really want you guys. And so George wants to make sure that Lenny stays quiet and just sits back and lets him do the talking. And once they get the job, then Lenny does speak up, and then the other farmhands start to get to know him a little bit more. And as they go throughout these interactions, you've got Slim, who kind of seems like the leader of the pack, or at least the one that everybody else looks up to and sort of takes their cues from him. You've got Curly, who is just this mean, spiteful guy who was recently married to this girl who is I believe, the farmer's daughter of that farm or that ranch. And he is just a real piece of work. Like, he just kind of seems to hate everybody. And there's all kinds of problems that arise from the marriage that he has with that girl that we'll get to later. And then Candy is another one of the names of an older guy that is there working and has this really old dog as well. And that becomes something that becomes important later on in the story. And a whole host of other characters. And they start to interact with each other, and some relationships begin to be forged between Slim and Candy and George and Lenny, and also some animosity, like between Curly and them. And so all of these things Steinbeck starts to weave together to leave little trails of breadcrumbs as to what is going to happen in the future. Little bits of foreshadowing that we can begin to see where things might start to go wrong in this story. And one of the interesting things too about this book is the idea of the era that it is written in. I think one of the great things about classic literature is it gives us a window into the way that things used to be, the way that humanity used to function, the things that were important in society, the way that people interacted with each other. And it's not the same as things are today. And that's important for us to learn and understand and help give us historical perspective when we think about the past. Not to view everything in the past through today's lens, but to look at it through their lens. There was a podcast that I listen to from time to time that talks about history, and it says history is a foreign language. And what that means is that just like if you go to a foreign country and you can't speak their language, you don't know what's going on. You don't understand, and you can't comprehend anything. Now, the same thing is true of history. If we go back to the 1930s with our 2020 sensibilities, things would be shockingly different to us. But if we can learn that language and learn how those people used the way that those people interacted with each other, the way that they talked to each other, the things that were important to them, that gives us a greater ability to understand the past. And this is one of the great things that comes from reading classic literature. It gives you that perspective that sometimes people today sorely need when thinking about the past. Now, as they get to know these different farmhands and start to strike up relationships with them, what we have to remember is this whole story, it takes place over a very short period of time. The whole thing happens in about 2.5 days. So things begin to go wrong for George and Lenny through no fault of their own. The problem is that, of course, Lenny has the mind of a child and likes certain things, like soft things, right? He likes to pet things, whether that be at the beginning of the story, a dead mouse that he finds and wants to pet the soft fur of the mouse. And George tells him, "Get rid of that. What the heck is wrong with you? You can't carry a dead mouse in your pocket." And he takes the dead mouse and chucks it over a lake or something. And then Lenny is sad. He's like, "I wanted to pet it. I love soft little furry animals. And of course, Lenny's dream, as a subset of George's dream, is to be able to raise a whole hutch of rabbits in their future farm life together. Once they get the money gathered together to get their own property, Lenny's greatest dream is to just have a bunch of rabbits and to be able to raise them and pet them and love them. And this is the part where the pop culture cartoon comes into my mind. If you all remember that, where he's like, and I want to pet them and love them and, call them George or something like that. I can't remember. It was a Looney Tunes cartoon, I think. But anyways, Lenny, that's his dream. He wants those rabbits. And so his whole fixation with soft things and petting things comes to a head when you find out that a dog at the farm had a litter of puppies. And so Lenny really wants one of those puppies. And so they get this guy whose dog it was to give Lenny one of the puppies. And then he's happy and he's always in the barn petting the puppy. And this leads to some really unfortunate, disastrous consequences. And one of the things that perhaps Steinbeck wants us to see and realize in relation of what happens to George and Lenny to the Great Depression is how dreams can be shattered so quickly. So once Lenny gets his puppy and is in the barn petting it all the time, another thing that happens is Curly's wife comes in and starts causing all kinds of trouble. She's one of those kinds of women. And between that and Lenny and his inability to judge situations correctly and his inability to do things the way that normal people would, leads to some disastrous consequences. And we'll get into that here in just a second in my spoiler portion of the review. But needless to say, the story has a powerful ending. It is tragic. It is heartbreaking. It brings together all of those metaphors that John Steinbeck has been carefully planting throughout the story, all together into one big, tragic, powerful ending. It's amazing. And like I said before, I didn't know how the end was going to happen, but when you get there, you can see what's about to happen. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh gosh, no, like, please not this. And sure enough, it ends up being that. And so it was really powerful. It was really great. And this is a thing that maybe I like. I don't know if all of you like it as well, but I really like tragic, sad stories for some reason. They just have this level of poignancy and reality that really speaks to me and makes it a great story. If you have a story that has more of a happy ending rather than a tragic ending, to me, it just doesn't have that same kind of kick to it. And it gives it a sense of reality because the real world is often very tragic. Not to say that we can't be happy from time to time and have happy stories. Those are good too. But those tragic endings really hit hard. And that's what I like. And so this, to me, was a 5-star read. I thought it was great. It is clear that this is a classic story, that it is a classic literature. One of the things that I like to do also is write reviews on Goodreads. And in my review there, I said that you can really feel a weight and a heft to classic literature. You can tell when something's classic. There is this heaviness to it where it feels like it's going to just stay there in the public consciousness for years and decades and even centuries. Other things just sort of get blown about and they're fun reads and you read it and you never think about it again. This story, this is something that's going to stick with me for a long time and clearly has stuck with many people over the decades and now almost 100 years because there is that weight to it. It is so heavy and it is so well written. And John Steinbeck has a way of letting us into the minds of these characters, letting us feel like they're real people. and the tragic situation that happens is just devastating. And for me, an absolute perfect 5-star read. So, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, that's a huge recommendation from me. Now, as the book dad, I can't recommend that you read this to your kids. This is not a book for kids, but it's an awesome book for adults, and I'm sure that you will all love it. Now, we're going to get to a brief spoiler portion of the review. For those that have read it, or for those that don't care about spoilers, feel free to stick around. But if you don't want any spoilers, go ahead and click off from here and go read it. It's not going to take you very long. It's a short book. And then come back and watch the spoiler-filled portion so we can talk about all the craziness that happened in this book that you don't want to find out about before you read it. Here we are in the spoiler version of the review. So this book was so good, I thought. The way that John Steinbeck seeded little clues throughout the story that let you see where it was going by the end. For example, George and Lenny are leaving this other farm. You know that something bad happened there. And they explain, the way that George explains it to Slim later on when they get to the new farm is that, oh, well, Lenny, he grabbed onto this girl there because he just wanted to pet her dress because it was soft, and he didn't know what he was doing, and she started screaming, and he didn't know what to do except hold on to her tighter. And then they thought that maybe he had done something bad to her, and then they were searching for her. But then as you get further in the story, you realize, oh, he killed her probably. It doesn't specifically state that, but that's what I believe. I think he killed that girl accidentally, because then when you move forward and you get to the whole metaphor with the dogs, right? Candy has his old decrepit dog who's stinking up the bunkhouse, and everybody wants to get rid of him, but he loves the dog and he can't kill him. But this is another interesting thing about this time period where they're so cold about just killing a dog. But I guess we go through that sometimes these days, right? You have to take a dog to the vet and have him put down when they can't have a good style of life anymore, or something, or whatever, right? So Candy has his old dog, and everybody's trying to convince him, look, just let us shoot the dog, okay? He's having a terrible life. He can barely eat. He can't do anything. Like, he's suffering. Let's just end this dog's life. And Candy can't do it, right? He loves the dog. It's his dog. He's had it forever. He doesn't want to kill the dog. So the other farmhand comes, and they convince him to let this other guy take his dog away and shoot him. And like Old Yeller, right? And spoiler alert for Old Yeller. No, so they go do that, and then it's sad, right? But then there's that new dog that has puppies, but then they're like, the guy that had that dog, the owner of that dog, is like, oh yeah, I had to like kill 5 of those puppies because there was too many. Like, man, there was a lot of dog murder in this book. So it was, I guess from our modern sensibilities, it seems a little cold and heartless, but let's remember this is the Great Depression, so there's a lot more tragic, pressing things going on at the time than having to worry about feeding a lot of dogs that you can't, a lot of mouths to feed. So anyways, then Lenny gets one of these puppies, right? And he's petting it, and he accidentally kills the puppy. This guy, Lenny, can't stop killing things. It's an accident, I get it, but man, that's sad. And so he kills the puppy accidentally, and then he has enough of a mind where he knows that he did something bad, but he doesn't have enough of a mind to be able to explain it or not try to hide it and make things worse. And so that in and of itself is tragic. And then, of course, Curly's little hussy of a wife comes in, and she's trying to stir up trouble and cause trouble. And she comes in and is talking to Lenny, but she doesn't realize exactly what's wrong with him. I guess she starts to see that, oh, like, this guy's not all mentally there or whatever. And then, of course, the same thing happens with her that happened with the other girl at the other farm. Lenny starts, like, touching her hair. Of course, she invites it. She's like, feel my hair, it's so soft. And so he starts to feel her hair, and he's like, that is soft. And then she's like, oh, okay, you're pulling too hard. And then all of a sudden things spiral out of control, and before you know it, she Lenny snaps her neck, and she's dead. It's just tragic. All of these things that happen, all of these circumstances that are really out of Lenny's control, but nevertheless, that happens. And at that point, then things, go spiraling out of control on the way to the ending of this book, which is just heartbreaking, where George comes in, sees what happened, and then just the full weight of his responsibility to Lenny hits him, just falls down on top of him, and he is just devastated. He knows what he has to do. And just like Candy's dog had to be put down earlier, he knows he's got to be the one to put Lenny down. Just heartbreaking, right? Oh my gosh, it's so good and so sad. And so he knows that Lenny is going to go off to the place where he told him to run and hide if there were any trouble or problems. And so then he sneaks off, steals the gun of one of the other farmhands, meets him there. And then you have one of the most poignant scenes of American literature, where they're sitting there. Lenny's looking off into the distance, George sitting behind him and telling him about their dream, their beautiful dream that they have together. They're going to get this place. They're going to farm it. They're going to have the rabbits for Lenny to take care of. And he's so happy. And in some part of his mind, does he know what's about to happen? Maybe some small part of his mind knows. And then George, this is the part that I didn't know. I didn't know if he was going to do it or not. I was like, in the end, is he going to falter? Is it going to be too hard for him? But at the end, his hand steadies and he shoots and kills Lenny. And man, what a devastating moment. What an absolute heartbreaking moment. And it really just brings everything together. The idea of how the Great Depression was destroying the dreams of Americans, and through no fault of their own, but through outside forces that were acting upon them. And George and Lenny, their dream together is shattered and dies because of these external forces that they couldn't control and that they had no ability to shape. But nevertheless, it happens, and then George has to take control and has to end things because of he can't allow Lenny to continue going about doing these things, even though it's not his fault. So, wow, just absolute brilliant storytelling by John Steinbeck. I loved it. It was so good. So, that's my review. I really love this book. It was a 5-star read for me. Thanks for those that are staying through the spoiler version. Again, I hope those that have gone back and read it as a result of this can come back and share their feelings about how this story made them feel. And so I hope to do many more book reviews in the future, both of classic books that I'm reading, as well as the modern fantasy and sci-fi books that I'm reading, and thrillers. One of the things that I'm doing right now is going through the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and I just finished the 3rd book, The Wastelands, and I'm waiting on getting the 4th book, Wizard and Glass. But while I'm waiting on that, I think I'm going to go back and start doing reviews for The Gunslinger, The Drawing of the Three, and The Wastelands, so that I can start that series from the beginning and get a review for each of the books. I know that as I started this YouTube channel, I kind of started it right in the middle of reading a bunch of different things, and I'm in a bunch of different series right now, and so I'll have to see if I can go back and start doing reviews for the beginning books of those series, or if I'll just start from where I am right now. But that'll be something that we see in the next couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed the review. I hope you all read Of Mice and Men. I give it a full recommendation. It's an awesome book. And let me know if you have read it, what you think of it, or what other classic books that you like to read and that would be good for reviews on this channel. But in the meantime, thanks for sticking with me. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, don't forget to read to your kids every night. All right, see ya.